This evening's presentation, I feel like I'm introducing a very dear friend. I am introducing a very dear friend. I have known Padma Kupa now for
10 years.
10 years. I knew her when she worked on the Ethnic Advisory Board for the City of Troy. I think that's how we met.
Yep.
And through Cindy Stewart, our Community Affairs Director. Some of you who did our congregation and House of Worship walk last fall may have met her in the Hindu temple where she is an active member. And she also serves on the Hindu American Foundation. I'm not going to tell you any more about her because her story is so interesting and exciting, and she is one of the most genuine and hardworking and devoted mothers, women of faith, and women who is aware of who she is that I know. Would you please warmly welcome Padma Kupa?
Thank you. Thank you. In the Indian or the Hindu tradition that I'm from, we have a way of greeting everyone, and that is with a namaste. Any of you who have done yoga will know. And I just wanted to start with this really quick video. Can you hear it? So namaste. Turn it on. I can just close it.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much. As you know, I'm here to talk about Indian American history in the United States, and so that is actually a Hindu greeting. So there's a place where culture and religion coincide, and as I tell you my story, you'll understand why I let in with that. My story parallels the story of many, many people who immigrated here. We had a particular reason to come to this country. Some of us out of no choice, some of us because we wanted to come, we wanted to immigrate, we chose to come to the United States. I had the opportunity to come out of my own choice, but the first time I came here was because I was 4 years old and my parents came here and I had no choice. They came here after 1965. Everyone knows what happened in 1965. Civil rights law changed. But along with civil rights law, the United States also changed immigration policy. And because of that change in immigration policy, up until that era, there had not been many people of Asian background who had come to the United States. The United States has had changed its immigration policy over decades, depending on what the need was. And in the 1960s, they needed doctors and engineers. And so one country that produces English-speaking doctors and engineers is India. And so, like the United States, it's a British colony. And the relic of being a British colony is that much of the education in India is in English, higher education. So my parents came here in 1969 and 1970. I came with my mom. My father came first. The head of the family comes first, so he came first. And that was true of many, many immigrants of that era, that they came here for higher education, and then they stayed here, got degrees, stayed here, built houses, built temples, like the one here in Troy that was built in the mid-70s. Soon after coming, they settled down and they built temples. However, that was not true of my parents. My parents actually went back in 1980 to India. And so I went back and I came back here as an immigrant, as a foreign student, as my parents had done before me. There were many, many Indian Americans here in the United States by that time. The immigration laws had tightened up somewhat, so I had to go through because I was not born here and because my parents had not taken on the kind of visa that they needed to stay here, and because I wasn't born here, I had to come back on a student visa to study, as my parents had done. And so I came back to the place that I was familiar with, and I came to the state of New York, because that's where I had grown up. And in the state of New York, I went to graduate school, and that was what most Indian Americans did. They came here, they did their residency, they got their master's or their PhDs, and then they sought employment. And many of them, like my parents, thought that they would go back. But as they raised children, they started realizing that they needed to have a house of worship, and so, or a cultural center. And so around the country, they started building temples. When I was growing up, I remember waking up the 4th of July one morning and had not seen that many people who looked like me before, because my parents took me one early morning on the 4th of July to see the consecration of the Hindu temple in Flushing, New York. That was one of the first temples that was built on the East Coast by the Indian immigrants that had come. Now, India is a country of many, many different languages and religions. So when I keep talking about Indian immigrants being Hindu, that's not synonymous. India is not only a country that contains Hindus. There are Christians, there are Jews, there are Muslims, there are Sikhs, there are Baha'is, there are Jains. I can keep going. And so many of the major religions of the world either were born in India or have strong communities of faith in India. And so Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, and Hindus. Buddha was born as a Hindu, much as Jesus was born as a Jew, and he became the founder of Buddhism. So similarly, other religions were also founded in India. Just as we have many religions in India, there are many, many languages. And so when I came here, my mom and my dad both spoke a language called Telugu, and that is from the southern part of India. And there are many, many languages that Indian immigrants who came here speak. There's Malayali. We have in Troy itself, we have about 12 of those languages represented in our school district. Out of the the many languages that are in India, India ended up having to choose, when it got its independence from the British, it ended up having to choose a language to unify the country, and it chose Hindustani, otherwise known as Hindi. So now Hindu and Hindi often used to get confused. And so people would ask me, can you say, when I was growing up, people would say, can you say something in Indian? And I'd be like, there is no such thing as Indian. Can you say something in Hindu? No, that's a religion. And so I would have to explain that the language that I spoke was a language called Telugu. It had its own alphabet, and my mom would sit during the summers, try to make me learn how to write it, and try to make me learn how to speak it, because they didn't want me to lose the culture that they were from. However, it's not that easy when you don't have a large connection, a collection of people of that community. So what people started doing was building organizations, and there's actually one here in Michigan that's been around for several decades. It's called the Detroit Telugu Association. And they get together for different events, cultural events that they do throughout the year, 3 or 4, maybe 5, and they bring in people from India who speak the language, who are important either in some civic way or in movies. India produces many, many movies, and my parents would take me to see movies in different Indian languages to connect with the culture. Because we didn't have a temple to go to, they would, at the university, at the student union in this university in New York that I was growing up in. And so many of us of my generation who grew up here grew up watching movies as a way to connect to the culture, because it was a tangible way to show you without having to take you to India every few months, because that was not an easy or financially feasible journey to take. And so movies became a means of explaining to your children what the culture is like, and that actually continues even now. I'm sure many of you have heard of Bollywood. It is the name for the Indian movie industry that's based out of Bombay. So, and then there's one for Telugu, which is the other very numerous movies are made in Telugu, and that is known as Tollywood, the area where those movies are made. So people would get together and they would have potlucks. Everybody would cook a dish, and then they would celebrate festivals together, and that's how I knew about culture when I was growing up. And then we moved to India. So I had a unique experience because I was able to go back when I was 15. Not that I liked going back. I'm sure you can imagine. It was a big cultural shift for me. And so I came back, the first thing I did after I got my bachelor's was to get a foreign student visa. I could not stay here by myself. I couldn't just come here without a valid reason to come here. So I came back here to go to graduate school. And so my experience was very different from my parents because I did want to stay here. And so I had to apply for a green card. So as soon as I got my degree, I then applied for a job. And as I applied for a job, the employer had to sponsor me. It wasn't like they were handing out visas, because India is not a country which has refugee status. It's a democracy. And so I had to go through a process called the green card process. People have made movies. It's nothing like in the movies. And so I got my green card after several years of going through the paperwork, because it's very bureaucratic. You have to say why you want to work here. Your employer has to say why they only want you. And it's a very involved process. Once you get through that part, which is called a labor certification, then you have to go through another process to prove that you're not a criminal. So you get fingerprinted to prove that, because India has people who have illnesses, they make you take x-rays, and so you have to go through all those steps to prove that you're okay health-wise, and you don't have any criminal record against you anywhere. And so they take all of that information, and then they finally interview you to find out if you're okay to be in this country. And so then they gave me a green card. And so I went through that process. And at that point, my parents, while I was going through that process, I was in my 20s, and my parents were getting worried. And so one of the things that's very, very common in the Indian culture, it is still a very traditional culture, is that dating was not very common. And that is actually one of the reasons that my parents decided to move back. And so they were very skeptical about the whole idea of me trying to find someone on my own. And so every so often they would say, okay, we have someone for you to meet. And I'd be like, but actually one of my friends in graduate school, two of my friends, sat me down and they said, you have to take your parents seriously. They really care about you. They really, really care about you. You need to take them seriously. And so they read me a lecture, and so then when I called the next person that my parents asked me to call, I spoke to him nicely, and I guess he also liked me because we've been married almost 20 years. And so people at work, when I was working at the time, and people at work were like, you're not going to do this. You're not going to go meet somebody and decide. I said, well, think about what's a blind date. How many of you have either known your children or yourselves been on a blind date? So the idea is that it's a blind date that your parents set you up on with the intent that it's going to lead to a long-term relationship. And you know exactly what you're getting into, you know exactly why you're there, and it's a very simple process. And most Indians do go through that, and it's not something negative for them. It's not something that you're forced to do. It's something that you go into with an open mind. And marriage is something that is very sacred. And so whether you're Hindu, Christian, Muslim, it's very common in India to marry within your community, because then, I mean, everyone knows marriage isn't easy. And so if you set aside some of those difficulties that for adjustment, whether it's diet, whether it's your faith practice, whether it's your language, because or your educational background. My husband and I are both engineers. And so we have something in common that you can build a life upon. And that is the reasoning behind, everybody used to ask me at work, how are you doing this? It's a different mindset to have that idea that maybe your parents do have the right idea when they're thinking about what your needs are. So I was working, we got married, and then obviously what happens next? You have kids. So my husband and I we had 2 children, both of them were born in New York. And what happened at that point was what happens to all of us. Job situations change, our life expectations kind of shift, and here I was in a job and he got an opportunity to move to Michigan from New York. And so we moved to New York, from New York to Michigan, and that happened about 13 years ago. And so people who come from India may initially get a degree in one particular state. They may get a job in that particular area, but then they may choose to move. And so our story is very typical of Indian immigrants who move to the United States. They may initially start out in one place, but then they migrate. What's interesting, though, is that there are many metropolitan regions in the country which have become sort of magnet areas for the Indian immigrants. And one of them, obviously, is the San Francisco area. There's a city called Fremont, and that area has many, many Indian immigrants, and that whole San Francisco Bay Area. Does anyone want to take a guess why? Well, no, the temple was built by many of the people there. No, it's because of the profession. There are a lot of Indians who are involved in information technology, and that's a booming area for information technology. So there are many, many people who are out in California, in the Bay Area, who do IT work. So one of the things that they did was they started an organization called the Indus Entrepreneur, because many of the Indian immigrants who came here realized one good way to realize the American dream was to set up a business. And so that organization, the Indus Entrepreneur, actually started in California, and then in other major metropolitan areas, just like there's a TIE Detroit. So it's called the Indus Entrepreneur, TIE, so we call it TIE. So there's actually an organization here in metropolitan Michigan, in southeastern Michigan, called TIE Detroit. So different organizations have formed like an alphabet soup. So there's the Detroit Telugu Association, there's Thai Detroit, so there's language-based organizations, there's professional organizations, there's also a Michigan Indian American Chamber of Commerce. So Indian Americans have included themselves in different ways within the landscape that is the United States. So as my journey, my personal journey, as I became a member of the Southeastern Michigan community, before my kids got too old, I wanted to have them have a connection to our culture and to our faith. And so because I had grown up with very little access to a religious community, because the first temple was built in 1976-77, I decided that we moved to Troy, and I decided that one way to keep my kids connected to the faith community was to become an active member. When you become a member, which is not required in the Hindu tradition, you do not need to become a member. You can just have an altar in your home. You don't even have to belong to a particular congregation. It's enough if you follow some simple basic human values, like she showed in the video, where you care for the poor and the needy, where you protect your planet, you honor the people around you. And so I thought for my children to learn, one of the things that we decided to do was to enroll them in classes at the Bharatiya temple. And so that's also something that happens traditionally. There are dance classes, language classes, and music classes, as well as, of course, religious education classes taught in most temples in the country, and this one is no different. And so when my kids were young, we started out first with simple religious practices that we would take them to, whether it was a Tuesday evening service or whether it was a Sunday morning service, we would take them there, and then we started enrolling them in different classes. And sometimes it would be a language class every year, or every couple of years we would shift. And that is one of the things that most Hindu Americans will do, and not just Hindu Americans, but Sikhs, Jains, and there are even Christians who follow a particular style of practice of their faith tradition. I don't know if you've seen the Troy Church of Christ on Waddles. They usually have an Indian service, which means there's this particular style of worship from within the Christian tradition also, and so they hold those. So they look, parents like who are trying to retain their tradition, their Indian American traditions, whether it's Hindu American or Muslim American, they will look for a house of worship, and we were no different. And we wanted to teach our children about our culture, and so we also and got involved in a couple of other organizations. And so one of them was the Detroit Telugu Association, and another one was one that was just a simple group of people that would get together once a month to learn something, to learn songs, to sing songs in the language Telugu. Because I don't speak Telugu as often as, say, somebody who spoke Telugu every day while they were growing up. I felt a need, and so I joined this organization so that my children got more familiar with that particular language tradition. So I was involved in the temple, I was involved in these social organizations, and then 9/11 happened. That kind of changed the face of the way I perceived who I was. I had been an Indian American for a large part of my life. When I got my citizenship, I swore that I would lay my life down for this country. But things kind of shifted after 9/11. I became involved in the Ethnic Issues Advisory Board because we knew that there was a certain fear of somebody who looked a certain way. In fact, when I was in graduate school, I remember, because even back then, that was in the late 80s, there was a lot of antagonism towards Hindus who wore dots on their head. And there was actually a spree of crimes in the late 80s, early 90s called the Dot Busters, where women who wore the bindi that I'm wearing now were attacked. And actually, I was walking in the mall and I had a bindi on, and somebody yelled at me, "Dot head!" And so it was quite intimidating. And so In 2002, when the City of Troy formed the Ethnic Issues Advisory Board, there was a former City Council member who realized that there's a need to bring people together so that we understand about one another, because the person you don't know, you tend to fear. And when you form friendships and you form community with people who are different from you, then the community becomes stronger. And so we formed the Ethnic Issues Advisory Board, and I became very involved in Troy Days and setting up ethnicity, and that's how I got to meet Lorraine. I'm not sure that as many Indian Americans who immigrate here are as quick to participate in a lot of these civic organizations. I think the difference for me seeing that need was because I had grown up here and I felt more comfortable in the framework that I had grown up in. But for people who didn't grow up with this kind of framework, it would be hard. Imagine if you had to come to this country or go to another country with 2 suitcases that was not the language that you spoke every day in your home, and you needed, for example, when I was sick from work, or if my children were sick and I needed to go to work, I didn't have a mom around the corner to babysit. To my neighbors right now, when their grandchildren are ill, they go and they babysit because they can't send their children to daycare. So there's no respite care, there's no family support structure. And so those were things that although I didn't have them, most of us who immigrate here don't have them. I'm sure many of you can tell from your backgrounds, if you know someone in your family who is an immigrant, you understand. Or even if you're not an immigrant, but if you moved from one state to another and your parents lived halfway across the country. But I felt much more willing to put myself out there, one, because I had the support of my family, and two, because I was raised with, my parents were much more engaged in doing work in the community when I was growing up. And I had family friends who were really exemplary in the civic work they did as well. So here I was in Troy, involved in the community. I remember even being out there on the road when this church, my kids and I were part of the people that lined up on the streets to see the church move, and the cables, and what a historic day that was when we brought the church to the museum. And so we formed the Ethnic Issues Advisory Board, and I was involved in the community, and I was doing all these different things with the temple, trying to get the temple to be more involved in the community as well, instead of being somewhat insular. And over the National Day of Prayer, we had a controversy about 7 years ago. And out of that controversy, I helped form an organization. I don't know how many of you are from Troy First United Methodist, but many of you will know a pastor named Reverend Rich Peacock. And he stood shoulder to shoulder with me, and he said, "This isn't going to happen in our city. We're an inclusive community." And so we had a National Day of Prayer at the Northminster Presbyterian Church, our first one in 2005. And that church now has an interfaith labyrinth. And so that became the start of my career, or activism, as an interfaith activist. Because I think the thing that I see, especially coming from living in India and living in the United States, we have embedded in our Constitution that everyone has a place at the table, whatever religion, or even if they're not. And that is what our Constitution protects. It protects freedom of religion. This is what we go around and protect around the world, or we try to. And so we have that opportunity to live out what's embedded in our Constitution, which is also what is embedded in my faith, the belief that everyone has a right to pray their own way, that everyone has divinity within them, because that's why I say namaste to you. And so in 2005, when we formed the Troy Interfaith Group, we started out with just one National Day of Prayer, and then that grew and it became an International Day of Peace event, and then it grew and it became a Thanksgiving event to celebrate the ethnic diversity of our city and the stories that immigrants have to share. And then a couple of years later, Harvard University, they have this thing called the Pluralism Project, and they came to know about Troy Interfaith Group. And they did a study in 2007, and so they started teaching about how Troy has this really rich ethnic and religious diversity, and how they came together and they formed this interfaith organization. And we are exemplary of how we deal with the different religious traditions that are in our city, and how the city is part of the growing interfaith movement that's part of what's going on in the country. And there's a professor at Harvard who now teaches not just her students, undergraduate students, but she teaches people who are in seminaries, people who are becoming rabbis and imams and Christian ministers about how to positively engage and have a positive outcome when you have religious diversity like we do here in Troy. And we are an example that is raised because of what we have done here in Troy. So through this involvement with the interfaith group locally, there is a woman that I met who is from the Jewish community in Bloomfield Hills. And they had formed, there were several Jewish women and Christian women and Muslim women that gotten together, and they had teenagers. And so they decided, because of some of the work that was some of the bad things that are happening in Israel and that part of the world, that they would reunite the children of Abraham. And so from that reuniting the children of Abraham, they decided, well, let's get women together, because women really do stuff. And so they said, women have wisdom. And they formed an organization called Women's Interfaith Solutions for Dialogue and Outreach in Metro Detroit. So you gotta forget the D, Women's Interfaith Solutions for Dialogue and Outreach in Metro Detroit. So WISDOM is the acronym, because women have wisdom. And in 2010, I became a board member of WISDOM. They invited me to be on their board. And in 2010, WISDOM published a book. And it's called Friendship and Faith. And this Friendship and Faith has my story in it, but also the 28 other stories of the women who helped form WISDOM. And what we speak about is about making friends, which may be the most important thing that we can do to make the world a better place, to transform our own life and to transform our communities. Because when we know about one another, that's when we can make peace in the world. And so we took all our stories and made basically a friendship quilt in this book. And this year we've actually published a study guide to go with it. And so my story is in here. And so this is the kind of work that I started doing that brought me to the attention of a national organization called the Hindu American Foundation, who made that video. And so that organization now goes and files advocacy. It's an advocacy organization, goes to Washington to advocate on issues that might be of importance to Hindu Americans. One year we went and we partnered with the American Pediatrics Association and the National Education Association to advocate on healthy meals in the schools. Because as Hindu Americans, we're vegetarian. A lot of the time the options that are available are not always healthy for our kids, or not even eatable because they're vegetarian and you might only have a hamburger or a hot dog on sale that day. And so we went to Congress and we said, we want you to support this particular bill that would, or we may go and speak on something else, maybe another policy issue that's important to the community at large. We have around 3 million Indian Americans who were born in India and who are here in the United States. Of those, about 2.5 million are Hindu, although there may be updated numbers because the latest Pew study came out. Pew is a research organization that publishes statistics on ethnicity, and also there are religious affiliations also through that, through another statistical. So it came out this week, literally, so I don't have the latest numbers, but there's about 2.5 million Hindu Americans in this country, and many of them are not just people who are born in India, but many of us who have children here as well. So, for example, my children. And so we publish information. Hindu American Foundation publishes information so that somebody doesn't call me a dot head. Why do I wear a dot on my head? So we have short answers to real questions about Hinduism. We provide information to the media, and those are the types of things we do. And I'd like to stop there and just kind of open it up to questions so that it's much more about what you want to know, because I'm sure that I can talk and talk, but that doesn't always answer the questions that people may have.
Children are boys, girls, what?
My children, I have one girl and one boy.
Are you still going to do arranged marriages on this one?
I think someone here in the room is in a state of denial, but my 16-year-old has a boyfriend.
From India?
He's from the United States.
Oh.
He was born in the U.S.
Oh, okay, but he is Indian.
No, he is not.
Oh, okay. So it's breaking up. What does the dot that you see in so many of the women? Some of them seem to be right in the skin, others seem to be surface. What is the significance?
Okay, so there's two parts to that question. One is, what is it actually? Why do you wear it? And the other part is, what does it consist of? So the reason you wear it, and actually men and women are all supposed to wear it in the Hindu tradition, and that is these two eyes, they look outward. We have an eye that is figurative, that looks inward. And that is a symbol of the eye that we have to look inward, because it's who we are on the inside that's more important. And so that's why all men and women, if you go to the temple, the priest will have some kind of mark. So my grandmother, when she wore the thing, or that generation, they wore a powder, which is it's called vermilion in English. It's called kumkum in Sanskrit or in Telugu. If you were to go to the temple on the altar, they have a big basin kind of thing with this red powder. And so that is what traditionally was worn. My mother, on the other hand, she wore a liquid. And so I sweat a lot. And I also like stickers because they're easy. I can carry them in my purse. I can put it on my steering wheel, which my husband doesn't like, but you get all the gum on the steering wheel. But the stickers are a lot more convenient for someone who doesn't always want to wear this, because it may not be the most appropriate to walk in, especially since I've had this bad experience of being called a dot head. I don't necessarily want to walk into some place with a dot on my head, or there may be an occasion for me to do so. Now my daughter, on the other hand, mine's really simple and plain. Can you see? It's just maroon. My daughter's, on the other hand, and I may have one in my purse, but they have little rhinestone kind of things, and they're colored and they match. So each generation, they change. And yeah, so, and they're more elaborate. For a wedding, a girl will probably get a much more elaborate version, but this works for me.
So, recently on TV I saw, this happened to be in the very wealthy people in India. They had a wedding that went on for 7 days. Now, my daughter also went to a wedding one time, and there they wore a lot of jade, but this wedding, they wore gold, more gold. I couldn't believe it. Some of the women looked like they were going to lean over. So much gold around their neck. What, is it simply that they want to show that they have money? There's no religious signification, is there?
Well, there's two parts. One is gold is security. There was a time in India where the girl got a dowry because women didn't inherit, even in the United States. When women didn't inherit, there had to be a way to provide your female offspring a part of the inheritance. Gold. So that's one reason. The other reason is that there is a particular, like you have denominations. There's different, what we call sampradaya within the Hindu community, and that it's partly cultural, it's partly religious. There are certain parts of India where gold is more valued as a personal possession than other parts of India. And so there is a tendency among certain ethnic communities within India to wear more gold than others. And southern India tends to be one of those. India is also, there's a lot of disparity between the wealthy and the poor, and so because India is booming, the wealthy are able to have very lavish weddings. But the reason that they used to have long weddings was when you didn't know your partner and your family wanted to get to know his family, because it's not There's a woman that used to be the Prime Minister of India named Indira Gandhi. She actually didn't marry somebody within her tradition. She actually married a Parsi, who is a different religion. And there is an exchange of letters between her father, who was the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, and his daughter when she was contemplating marrying this young Parsi man. And he said, marriage isn't just between two individuals, it's between two families. And so when the bride and the groom didn't know each other, and they needed to get they got married, it was also important to have a very long process for them to get to, the wedding was a means for them to get to know one another and for the families to get to know one another. And so that's why we have long weddings. Now people have made them really lavish, but that's the background behind why weddings were as long as they were, because you lived in one village, they lived in another village, you got together, probably in the girls' village where the wedding was, and then you hosted them and you got to know one and each other's families. And so that's where the origin of the long wedding is from.
Other questions? Yeah. So what if the families got to know each other and they didn't care for each other? Are there pieces where they would sit halfway through, or is that not, like, you stick to something, you go throughout the whole wedding process? Right.
It wasn't like you got to be friends with one another. I usually, when people are set up to be arranged to meet, the families meet beforehand. They don't just decide we're going to get married. They get to know each other beforehand. They have engagement ceremonies. There's more than one occasion before they decide we're going to get married. Nowadays, people do wait between the time they meet, the time they get engaged, the time they get married. It's not like within weeks or within days. And I think people's expectations have changed over generations as well. So now it's a little bit more drawn out, the process.
Yeah.
You said there were different religions in different parts of India. Is there a set of common beliefs, traits between them?
So Hinduism is probably one of the most, it's the most difficult to define because it is so vast in its scripture, and people are still discovering things every day. At one point they thought the Aryans came and they invaded India and they brought, and now they have biological evidence that that's not the case, and that the Indus Valley civilization was not a result of the Aryan invasions, and so but they haven't quite figured out how to define Hinduism, and there are people who still today in academia try to exoticize what it means to be a Hindu. And so there are people within the Hindu tradition, oh, Hinduism is a word the white man gave us, they don't want to call it Hinduism, they want to call it something else. So it can be very complicated. At different times in India's history, different movements have started. And so one of them, there was a person named Mahavir, and out of that movement became Jainism, and that is a distinct religion. Then there were the Guru Granth Sahib and the gurus from the Sikh tradition, and they have a particular set of beliefs in a particular scripture and tradition. Those are two of the religions. And the third major religion that I can say that was founded in India is obviously Buddhism. Because Buddha was a Hindu prince. His father, in the story of how the Buddha was protected, his father didn't want him to see anything, and so then he decided to go out on his own, left his palace and left the kingdom and became a renunciate. And so that is the third major religion. But every religion has freedom of expression in India, and that is one of the beauties of the culture and the ethos. Unfortunately, politics will do crazy things, and so I don't really want to talk too much more about religion in India because it gets awkward. So.
Would you recommend a couple of movies from India for us?
Yes. My favorite movie was an Oscar nominee. It's called Lagan. It's very long. It's almost 4 hours long. But, do you like, anybody here like baseball? Okay, there's a game of cricket in the movie. Like half the movie is a game of cricket. And you will enjoy the movie because it's about kicking the British out. So for me, it's got all the fun and songs that are familiar, that are common in Indian movies. There's always a love interest, and there's community building, there's faith, there's sports. So you've got a little bit of something for everybody. So even if you have to watch it over 4 days, that's a really good movie. I believe we have another, and again, I'm going to give you another one that's a cricket movie. There's one called Iqbal. And that's a really good movie. It's about a young man who is from a village who wants to play cricket and finds an old cricketer who's become an alcoholic and reclaims that alcoholic cricketer, and he becomes a successful cricket player.
Can you spell those spells?
Sure. Lagaan. And the other one is Iqbal. And then, okay, I'm going to totally put my husband. Do you have a third recommendation? Sholay? No? Okay. All right. But those two are probably my two favorites. And if I can think of others, I'll
Are you looking for love stories?
Are you looking?
Are you trying to think of love stories?
No. Do you have some that you like? I mean, I think every Indian movie is a love story. It's either a love story gone wrong or a love story gone right. Dil to pagal hai, okay. Kuch kuch hota hai, okay. And kabhi khushi kabhi gum. Okay, so do you want me to spell those? Okay.
I'll tell you what, how about if you give those to me, and we'll put them up on the website.
Okay, I'll email them to you. Because I'll go home to my daughter and son and make sure that those are ones that people will enjoy.
Do you ever go back to India?
We do. Since my parents moved back there in 1980-81, they did not want to come back. My father and mother felt that this was not where they were at home, and so they come to visit occasionally, but they really have settled there. I have, my in-laws are now there because my husband also grew up in India, and so so we go back quite often.
Go back, does the heat bother you? I ask this because an odd story happened to me. I was having a garage sale. A woman came and bought some items. She looked very much dark hair like you, but she had on what I had on, a treated blouse and just slacks on. And so, you know, didn't say anything too much. The next year, I had another garage sale, and here she came again, dressed the same way, but she had two women with her, looked very much dark hair, and they were dressed, well, they had on like slacks, a large lightweight material, and a top over, kind of almost mandarin collar a little bit, you might say. And she said, "Oh, you have another garage sale. I brought my sisters because you have good stuff." And I said to her, "Yeah, I remember you." I said, "These are your sisters?" You know, because now I'm seeing two dresses, like Indian customs, you know, and her just like I am. And she said, "What?" And she said, "Oh, yes," she said, "I came to the United States." She married in India, so it was an Indian man, with a 4-month-old baby. In February, this is what she actually told me, and I busted out laughing. And she said, "I got off the plane, and it was snowing, and it was cold, and I said, oh, I love it. I'm never going back to India." And she said, "I never have. I can't stand it," she said. So I had my sisters, I paid for them to come and visit me every 2 years, and they stayed 2 months with me. And I said, "Hey, you never go back?" She said, "Not me."
That's interesting. That's not very typical.
And I said, you know, but she was very determined, and as I'm like I say, she looked, her composition of her skin was very much like you. So I mean,
No, I think it's all kinds, and different parts of India has snow, and other parts are very, very tropical. So people could come from different parts of India where they are And people who live in Michigan their whole life hate the snow and they leave and they go away. When they go to college, they never come back, you know?
Are there a couple of books that you would recommend, like really readable books that would?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because I almost forgot about the books that I brought with me. This one's a really good book. It's part of a series called Ethnicity in Michigan, and this is one of my favorite books. They tell anecdotal, but they also give like a broad stroke. Some of the anecdotes are not always typical, but then you heard me and I'm not the average either. So, but this is from Western Michigan. It's called the Discovering the Peoples of Michigan series, and this gentleman's name is Arthur W. Hellweg.
That entire series is available at the local history conference.
Right, and I would, if you were to get one book about immigrants to Michigan, I would get the first in the series, which is called Ethnicity in Michigan. And he covers from the Native Americans till today. And he talks about, there's actually two authors to that, Arthur Hellweg and, I can't remember the other gentleman's name, Jack. Anyway, but I've actually communicated and been in touch with, he's now I think in Ohio at Oberlin. He, just amazing, their insight, because I experience it. Because when immigrants came here 30 years ago, there was no internet. Today when immigrants come, they can stay connected to their home country much more. In fact, if you think about Laura Ingalls Wilder or someone who came in the early 1900s, they came and they left their parent country and their culture there, and whatever they brought with them in 2 suitcases was all they had. Today, you can go to probably every 2 miles in Troy, you can find an Indian grocery store. When I was growing up, my favorite vegetable, South Indian vegetable, was okra, ladyfinger, I don't know. And when I was growing up, you couldn't get it in the stores. We'd have to go all the way into New York to a special store, which we went like once every 6 months, and that's how often I got to eat it. My kids get to eat it every week because there's always some store that's got fresh okra. It would be like a holiday because Pathmark had frozen okra that month, and so my mom would bring it at home, and so it's very different because communication and travel. And I'll tell one little thing. You know, March is reading month. Everybody knows that, right? And my children 1 month had to read to a senior citizen. And so I was working. My kids were both old enough to be home alone, but my son got really smart. He Skyped my father-in-law and read him a book online. So those are the things that the internet has changed. So the cultural connections to the old country are much stronger today than they could ever have been before. So,
The tradition of vegetarianism, is that because of lack of other products, or is because your homeland grew a lot of vegetables?
India is very agricultural, but I think vegetarianism has waxed and waned in India, but a large part of it is as we evolve as humans. I don't know how many of you have heard of Michael Pollan or have, we all, the more we eat plant food and plant-based, the healthier it is for us. The tradition that we are vegetarian comes from the concept of ahimsa, which is a Hindu and Jain belief of being non-cruel. Ahimsa is being cruel in thought, word, or deed. And ahimsa means being not cruel, non-violent. And that is what the concept, the basic foundational concept of Hinduism that gave rise to what Gandhi did, which was the movement of civil disobedience, which then MLK took. But that idea of being the higher level thinking by being vegetarian because you're not killing another creature. That is where a lot of the vegetarianism comes from. Not everybody who is Indian is vegetarian, not everybody who's Hindu is vegetarian. It's just, the cow is sacred, sort of like how Jewish people won't eat milk and meat together and separate. Hindus also.
Do you have more books, and can they be put on the website?
Yes.
Yes, so I'll give you a list of, yeah, I do. Actually, The Philosophies of India by Heinrich Zimmer. Actually, you know, the easiest thing to do is I write a blog. I'm a writer as well as being an engineer. And so I have a blog, and it's my name, padmakupa.blogspot.com. And I have a list of book recommendations on the side. So we can, but I'll send a list of book recommendations as well as you.
How do you feel about like stereotypes like on TV and everything, like with like The Big Bang Theory? I don't know if you watch that show with him.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it.
Like that cell phone commercial that plays those two Indian guys that have, like how does...
Stereotypes of any kind are difficult, but they exist. And so I think opportunities like this for you to ask questions and for people to get to know one another, and that's why I do what I do with Wisdom, because that is the general idea. I work with Michigan Roundtable as well to do a lot of oh, you had asked about another book. So people used to ask me a lot of questions about Hinduism. I was a Hindu, but I didn't really know how to answer those questions when I was in graduate school, when I came back here. And so I went out and I bought a book so I could tell people, because I knew what I practiced. But how do you tell somebody what your faith is in a way that they can understand when you're not trying to tell them how to practice it, you're telling them what. So I went out and got a book, and there's actually now a magazine that's been available online that anybody, so I could recommend that if you wanted to know more about Hinduism, I would say go to hinduismtoday.com. Like christianitytoday.com, there's a hinduismtoday.com. So, and then I wanted to share one more funny book, and that is, I needed to pick names for my kids that people wouldn't mispronounce, because I used to hate it when people would say my name wrong or my friend's name's wrong. And so I found this book, and it's very sensitive to the fact that you need to pick a name for your child that people don't make fun of. And so the pink is for the girls and the blue is for the boys. And so it's pick a pretty Indian name for your baby. So I've still kept it. Not that I'm going to be using it again, but.
What did you pick?
My daughter's name is Srikari and my son's name is Shreyas, and they come side by side in a hymn. My daughter's name, actually, my mother-in-law gave us a short list of names, and out of that list, we picked her name, and then I kind of liked his name because it came right next to hers in a hymn that I like. So, and hers means one who brings good fortune, and his means one who is good or well-being, because she was always sick, so I really liked the meaning of his name. And when I was expecting her, my husband worked in another state, and he worked in New Jersey and I worked in New York, and so about 3 weeks before she was born, he got a job in New York, so she brought prosperity because we got to be together. So. Oh, okay.
Did you like the movie Slumdog Millionaire?
Not really. I'm in a church, I don't like to use this word, but there's a woman named Chitra Divakaruni who's a writer in California. And she wrote a really beautiful critique of the movie, and she called it poverty porn. And that's kind of how I felt about it. I felt like the people who took the movie took advantage, and it didn't sit right with me. So.
It sounds as though the role of women who are of Indian descent is at least equal with men. Is that just a perception, or is that right?
I would say it's real. I think culturally, because of certain, again, stereotypes, there may be some perception that it's not, but from within the cultural traditions, whether you look at Islam or Christianity or Hinduism, the role of women is very strong from the faith. In fact, within the Indian traditions, there's different, like I was saying before, sampradaya, like denominations. There's one line of school of philosophy that the divine is feminine. And that is the Shakti school. And so there is a very strong belief in, and actually when I was in college, I did a research paper on disparity in income between men and women, and actually the disparity in income for the same job is more in the United States than it is in India. India has actually made quite a few strides that we have not yet. It had a woman leader. head of the country, so.
I have twin daughters who are 25, and last year one of their Indian high school friends got married, and it was an arranged marriage. And she told my daughter, she said, well, I know it seems very odd and strange to you, particularly in this day and age, but it's something I feel very strongly about, connected to my culture. And it was on the premise that she met a young man and things worked out fine, and if not, then they would go their separate ways. But she kind of made it sound, I didn't talk to her, but through my daughters, that there was like a matchmaker, that, and I hate to use the word astrology, but the way they sound like the stars and...
Yep, they do. They do. They did it for us too. Some people have a belief and they kind of, that it's all hocus pocus, but there's some of us who believe and you know, they've been doing it for so long, who am I to say it's wrong? You know, it worked out, so I'm okay with it.
So this would be someone's career to be a matchmaker?
Right now, because of the internet, they have many internet career matchmaking sites.
Okay.
There's one called Bharat Matrimony. They have papers. It's funny because in Queens they have a paper that had all the matrimonial ads, and in Brooklyn they had one. The one in Queens was for the Hindus. The one in Brooklyn was for the Jews. So I mean, it's still very much done by people, by word of mouth, but it's also done now because of the wide range of resources available through print and online media.
Thanks.
A couple housekeeping things so that I don't make any stupid mistakes. Padma is your first name, Koopa is your...
Maiden name because I didn't change my last name when I got married.
Okay, how do I know what is the family name and what is the person's name?
Okay, so this is really complicated because in India traditionally, first of all, remember I said there's so many languages and so many cultures, and so in some communities in India, ethnic communities in India, my last name would be my father's first name, but I'm not from that community. So Koopa is my family name. My father's last name is Koopa. However, when I went to school, my father, because in India the custom was to write your last name initial and then your given name. My father's name was K. Srinivasa Shastri. Now my mother was given the name Usha Rani. Rani means queen, and it was kind of frivolous. So when she got married, she took my dad's first name and did that K. Usha Srinivas because my father. So when they put me in school, my parents figured out, well, here's first name, okay, Padma. Here's last name, Koopa. Okay, so then when we got to like second grade, they called my parents in. They're like, why do you have 3 last names? One of you is Shastri, one of you is Srinivas, and your daughter is Koopa. Well, explain this. So it's very hard because when Indians get passports in India, they get it according to the Indian tradition. So you may have your last initial as the first part of your name, and Srinivasa Shastri. So in my father's passport, it says K. Srinivasa Shastri. My mother's passport says K. Usha Srinivas. And so that is what causes some of the confusion. I would not hesitate to just ask someone. I think it's a lot easier just to be open and say, I hear in India that there's different ways, which is your first name, which is your last name, if you have any question. And actually open a conversation, because people may have, we actually have a friend who part of his first name ended up being his son's last name, because they didn't know, because they just wrote it in the passport and in the whatever forms. And so people would enjoy sharing with you what their real name is, because they don't get an opportunity to otherwise. So.
What about your children? What last name do they have?
They have their dad's last name. So can you tell I'm from New York? I did not want to, I was in line at the Secretary of State in New York, is known as motor vehicle, and I was online one day to renew my license, and the woman in front of me told me that she had taken a week off to get everything changed. And I had just gotten engaged. So I decided then and there that I wasn't wasting a week of vacation to change my last name, and so it stayed that way for the last, but my kids have their dad's last name, which is their family name. So It's too long to put, it's a really long last name, so it was much faster to say mine anyway.